I'm so good. It's so good to see you. And
Yeah, you
your
too.
terrifying girl painting behind you. I love her so
Yes.
much.
She's a vintage paint by numbers that's I think she's called Tear, but it was described as adolescent girl crying. She's just like so good, you know?
Wait, and that's so funny. That's so relevant to your movie. Like that one line
Totally.
you have in your movie. Like, so we'll just jump in and talking about
Great,
Perpetrator.
great, great, great.
Congratulations on your second full feature. How
Thank
does it
you.
feel? Have it out in the
Oh,
world finally.
it feels fantastic. Yeah, really great. I mean, I was very happy, I mean, at some point when the world broke down in 2020, I was like, well, I'm never going to make a film again, like, and then it felt, even still within very strict COVID, restrictions, being able to shoot. We shot that in the spring of 2023, and I was like very, very thankful.
Well, it's actually your third feature film. I'm so sorry because you had your COVID film, The Night's at like so
Yeah, yeah, right.
you've had a lot going on in COVID, even though you thought you'd
Yeah,
never have a film again. It's got to be kind of cool to be like, wait, all of a sudden your creativity seems to be all over the place now
yeah,
during the
exactly. So
pandemic. That's wild.
yeah, so in 2021, I shot Night's End, but then I also shot a section of VHS 94.
Yeah.
So it was a really I was just it I mean, I wasn't sort of I mean, on the one hand, I think I was desperate to do something, kind of creative, and Night's End was just felt at the end of the day like I was able to kind of make a film over 13 days with my friends, and I mean, it was still, like a proper, a proper film, but I think we were
Yeah.
all like just trying to figure out how to stay out of jail, and like we are all just like restless, like, God, what do we do, Mhm.
Well, so where does Perpetrator come from for you? It feels very much like your first feature film, Knives and Skin, and it has like more of that kind of dreamy femme vibe. So I wanted to hear more about where this story kind of came from for you and why continue this whole like young girls trend in your filmography.
Sure. So, even before touring around with Knives and Skin, when I would screen the shorts that I made leading up to it, which are also about so much the experiences of girls, for instance, um, I would get these questions sometimes from press or sometimes in Q&As about, my experience working with so many, teenage girls in front of the camera, and I would say it's awesome. That's why I keep doing it,
Yeah.
and then I realized that the assumption from the person asking the question was the opposite, that their absolute nightmare would be walking on set to like 22 14-year-old girls, and I thought, wow, okay. And I mean, I knew this already, but it really hammered home this idea that, we're a culture that's totally obsessed with youth and beauty, especially among young women. And we also just hate young women. We've built a machine to just like trash their evolution. And, so just as I think I'm done for a little while, at least making a film about the experiences of adolescent girls, then some little germ wiggles in under my skin, and I'm like, I gotta make that movie. So, and right around that time, and it was spring of 2019, because Knives and Skin was sort of like hot off of Berlin and then getting ready to go to Tribeca. um and I had also just rewatched, as one might do, the 80s iteration of Cat People. And I thought, okay, there's something here. This is a kind of a shapeshifter story that I haven't seen necessarily. There's like inheritance, and there's this weird obsession with her virginity, and it's provocative and nuanced. And then I still had this idea in my head of a story about a wild and out of control girl who really becomes wild and out of control. Thinking about the way that we use that term wild and out of control, not to give agency to a young girl's independence, but to really diminish it.
Yeah.
That's not a term that's used to uplift, young women's independence, especially around her, sexuality. So, and then it occurred to me like, oh, the sort of origin of every kind of great shapeshifter story. So I told, one of my producers, I said, I think I want to make something that feels like a nuanced, teen shapeshifter story, like a kind of a coming of age Cat People, and he was like, oh, I want to help you make that film. And, of course, at the end of the day, Perpetrator is nothing like Cat People, which is fine. I didn't set out to remake Cat People, um, and so then, then I start, figuring out, like, I knew that I didn't want her to be a werewolf or a vampire. So I was really dug in and thought, like, okay, like, what does she do? What is her power? What will be something that is not just unexpected, but that will really be a kind of allegorical way of talking about even teen transformation,
Yeah.
and inheriting, what we inherit from, the women in our lives, those kind of legacies that I think are really empowering. And yeah, so I mean, I'm still not done, at least, thinking about the experiences of girls and women, because I think there's so much content made for girls and women that still feels really inauthentic. So I always still feel like it's, I got to get in there and get it right, at least for myself. So
Yeah.
that's really where Perpetrator came from. And at the very beginning, the film was called A Girl and Other Small Stains, which I still like.
Oh,
Um,
I love that.
I'll
Oh, because
recycle it. I promise. I'll recycle it.
well, and like this is a movie I wish I had seen as a young girl. You know what I mean? Like it's okay to kind of be feral, and like you can, because I feel like so many transformation movies you become not so feral. Like you're supposed to not be that anymore, but here you lean into that. And I love showing girls like you can be kind of a like monsters aren't bad. And I know that's not a new thing, but I like the context of this and kind of giving teenage girls the ability to be monsters and gross and bloody and queer. I think the queerness you imbue in this is so important too, because it's just queerness, but normal, not a
Right.
spectacle, but just teenage girls kissing. Like, like it's just like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I love that you're exploring queerness even more in this film as well. And I just
Yeah.
wanted to
And
hear
I,
more
and it,
about doing that. Yeah.
yeah. That simply just feels totally authentic to, um,
Who
to,
amongst us hasn't kissed a best friend at a sleepover slash,
right.
experimented with sexuality? We all have as kids,
100%,
Yeah.
100%. And I think that it just feels authentic to not only sort of like female friendship, but female intimacy,
Yeah.
that may or may not be, um like romantic additionally, and that no one has to sort of be the pariah. I mean, having said that, I also felt really proud of the exchange where Johnny's in the car with Kirk, and she's talking about how she doesn't really like to go on dates, and he says, is it because you're terrifying? I mean, and in that moment where he also acknowledges her sort of monstrousness, but it's also kind of lands as sort of a joke. I mean, he's not really um insulting her. He's kind of being sort of authentic and real, and real, and sort of using that sense of acknowledging that being terrifying can also be very powerful. And it felt really productive to have her blood be its own kind of character, or have
Yeah.
blood itself be its own character, because I still think that we 100%, live in a culture that treats, the blood that, humans with uteruses experience constantly from a young age, in sometimes very gnarly ways.
Yeah.
We still live in a culture where that's at best a secret, and at worst, shameful. And I've always thought that was ridiculous. I mean, I could go on about how, childbirth is genre, or
Oh yeah.
miscarriage is genre, and it's still like really, not only do women not talk about it, where there's all sorts of genders in the audience with or without uteruses, but we don't really talk about it amongst each other. And so I really wanted to make a film that was pretty properly bloody, and in that way actually more authentic. you know
Well, and like I mean, you have people, especially women, really touching blood and really not just being scared of it, but like it's how they access their power. And I love that. Alicia Silverstone says, "Oh, who cares? I'll wash the blood out of the like."
Right.
There's no shame around blood, and there's actual like love around the blood, and like in certain instances, it is more obviously coded as menstrual blood. And I love that embracing of blood rather than disgust. And tied with this, I want to talk about Kia McKiernan, who is our Johnny, who is just like iconic. How did you find her? Like, what was that process in finding this incredible actor to play your Johnny?
So I knew when we really started actively, like trying to attach Johnny, that I really only wanted to talk to young women of color, that I
Oh,
really
cool.
thought
Okay,
that
awesome.
was that I set out to think about. I mean, not only because I wanted to make the lead somebody who's so many, young women of color who are genre super fans, they deserve to see themselves, on
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah.
And the kind of representation, that I used in Knives and Skin, was really meaningful. Having young women come up to me, young women of color, kind of genre super fans, and be so in love with Charlotte, my kind of
Yeah.
goth girl in Irion Roach, who I recast also in
Yeah.
Perpetrator. So I really set out to to cast a young woman of color, and because I also thought that, especially if she was sort of multiracial, that it would make her own, like that her own kind of origin story in real life would make sense to Johnny's own story, and then it would
Okay.
also be a more kind of complicated reveal when the mom shows up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and Kaya, was like the first young actress that I spoke to. And I spoke to a lot of really amazing, accomplished, smart young women. And Kaya was the first one to really set straight up, say, I know exactly sort of like who Johnny is and what she feels. I'm a multiracial woman. I'm a queer woman. And I get it. I get her in my own skin. And I was like, oh, that's our girl, And she just really smartly articulated what I had hoped we could accomplish in casting, a young woman of color in that role. But she said it herself. I did not, she brought that part up. And so I knew that she was going to be able to carry that part. I mean, she is in every single scene, and she
Yeah.
was she was like there every single day of shooting. And, you have to have somebody who is totally committed, to that level of, to that level, to make sure that it happens, and not somebody who's just like, yeah, I'll do your film. It seems interesting. And I want to be a lead or whatever. I was just like, yeah, that's our girl.
Amazing. And like the way she handles the source material, like your script, and the way that she embodies Johnny as this character. I mean, was it a lot of work you had to do with her, or was she just ready in that headspace like as soon as she came to set?
I mean, there was, I think that the like directing her to sort of interact with the blood sometimes was a challenge, because she was like, what am I doing?
Oh,
Or, you know what I
okay.
mean? Like when she would
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
like, so for
yeah.
instance, like in her transition kind of night, when she's reaching into the sort of blood that's kind of, pooled
Yeah.
from her bloody nose, and the blood sort of is kind of yanking her in, that the
Yeah.
blood has agency.
Yeah.
She was like, well, is there somebody in there, or what, or why am I, and I was like, no, it's like like the blood is,
Okay.
the blood itself has, power and agency, and the blood itself is like, is kind of pulling you, closer to it. It's your blood. And then she was like, then I had to sort of I mean, I'm really honestly the worst actor, even when I'm kind of like, well, here's sort of what you should do, then she was like, oh, okay, I get it. Or some of the other like moments the kind of lipstick that kind of turns into blood,
Yeah.
being able to say, no, it's not like the lipstick that you ate like liquefies into it. It's allegorical. It's like surreal. It's a kind of a vision. You're syncing up with Hildy, whose mouth also kind of pools with blood. And there would be sometimes when she and Alicia would be like, oh, I get it. And then sometimes they were like, it's fine, let's just shoot the scene, we're making art. Alicia would say that
I love that.
over and over again. She would call me and say, why why does Hildy, blah, blah, blah. And then most oftentimes before I could answer the question, and I always had an answer, she was like, never mind, we're making art. I'll call you back later, you know? And I was like, it's true, you know, like that's what we are making. And she wasn't dismissing the meaning in it. You know, I think
Yeah.
she was actually also, she was saying this thing that writers and directors need to hear, or I loved hearing it. She was like, I trust you. Okay. Like I am not sure like how exactly this scene will look, but I trust you and I trust your vision, and I've sewn myself to the vision, and we're going to make this happen, you know.
I
And
love
so,
that.
you know, that feels like that, you know, makes sense to me. And then there were other, you know, there were other scenes that I thought would be more difficult, kind of conceptually, that, you know, that Kaya or Alicia or, you know, Christopher Lowell were just like, no, I know exactly how to do this, you know. So it was an interesting, you know, it was interesting process that involved, you know, just vats and vats of blood,
Love
theatrical
that.
blood.
Yeah, exactly. Theatrical blood. But okay, Alicia Silverstone as Hildy, incredible choice. Her performance is just like got that campy aunt. Like she
Mm-hmm.
looks like a horror movie aunt. Like it's
Oh,
incredible.
totally.
And
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear more about kind of how you like the look of her. I mean, the entire production costume design in this film, of course, is incredible. But like, what was it like shaping Hildy, not just with Alicia, but also just like aesthetically too?
So, you know, I mean, she had been somebody who I was interested in working with even when we were casting Knives and Skin. You know, her
Okay.
own kind of like meta story as someone who was introduced to us as this iconic teenager. You know, I liked the idea of recasting her as this really powerful matriarch who's mentoring another hopefully iconic teenager in Arjani. And I wrote that in a letter that I wrote to her just to kind of get her interested in the script. And you know, she said that was really meaningful to her, and no one had ever, you know, suggested that that's why they wanted to cast her, which was
Oh,
startling to me, you know, because I liked her. I mean, I liked thinking about someone's own provenance in real life and what that kind of
yeah.
backstory brings. And I think that her own real life backstory feels really meaningful. And so then when she attached, and it didn't take long at all, uh, I had her watch The Hunger, this Catherine the Catherine Deneuve, David Bowie.
Yes.
I had her watch The Hunger because I was like, I'm going to pattern Hildy after Miriam Blaylock, who's Catherine Deneuve in that film. Very
Okay.
structured hair, kind of vintage, very stylized way of talking, very purposeful in her mannerisms. Yeah, campy. I had her watch a bunch of kind of the cool Hitchcockian blondes, Marnie, Vertigo, you know,
Okay.
really thinking about
Yeah.
those.
That kind of woman, like that, like a
Yes,
traditional, like you think is a traditional starlet Hollywood. Yeah.
yes. And kind of
Um,
like unknowable, you know, both the
yeah.
sort of like Kim Novak and Tippi Hedren and Marnie and Vertigo are really kind of unknowable women. I mean, even
Yeah.
so much like you know, Catherine Deneuve as this kind of immortal in The Hunger, you know, I mean, we think we have access to them because they're beautiful women, and we want to consume beautiful women. Um, and yet they actually are extraordinarily sort of like restrained, and you can only kind of get so far. So I thought that would be really productive, and she had never seen The Hunger, and I think it had been a long time since she had maybe even
Okay.
consumed any kind of Hitchcock, you know, and she just got it immediately. And you know, in her real life, she still sounds a lot like Cher Horowitz. You know, she's still sort of just like,
Yeah.
hey, has this kind of Southern California upspeak, and is, you know, loose blonde, you know, Southern California hair, and yet really understood how she was going to sew herself into Hildy's skin. And she spoke slower. She lowered the register of her voice. She, you know, loved the red nails. She loved the red lips. She brought some of her own Christian Siriano gowns, you know, which makes the
Like,
production seem like it cost way more, you know, than it actually did. Her costumes, you know, in fact, you know, lots of Siriano gowns, but
oh my God.
but she needed to have that that kind of structure and restraint.
Wow. Well, Jennifer, I could ask you so many questions, but I have to wrap up. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today about Perpetrator. It's
Oh,
so
anytime, always.
just vibey and great. And so I'm excited for a new generation of horror fans to see it and maybe feel seen even more.
Right on.
Fingers crossed. Thank
All right.
you.
Have a great day.